Good evening, my washers and dryers, and welcome back to The Large Amount, where today we are talking about everything I read in the month of July. There were a lot. First book I read in July was Serpented Dog by Shelby Mahurin, which is a YA fantasy about a witch and a witch hunter thrust into holy matrimony. That's all that's on the back cover, and I've looked it up to try and figure out what the marketed story was, but at the end of the day, it didn't really matter because this was 500 pages of my trash. I am not going to try to convince a single soul it's good, because it doesn't matter to me, because this had everything in it I could want. Reed, the chasseur, or witch hunter, is part of this religious order. Man's built like a refrigerator, so Shelby Mahurin really understands what people want nowadays. Lou, as this witch, she was fine. Like, she was exactly what she needed to be, because it meant her dynamic with Reed worked, and that carries a lot of it. But it's got so many bad tropes, like the fake forced marriage thing, because the whole thing, this all starts because Lou and Reed, while going to the theater, have like an encounter, and she lands across the stage, I don't know, like tits out or something, and the Archbishop is like, "Oh, we can fix this. They're married." But it's everything I want in a book, because it reads so easily, and I had such a fun time with it that I'm willing to overlook a lot. Again, I'm not going to try to convince anyone it is a good book, but it was a great book. I had a great time, partially because I really like the religious order that's in the book. It's definitely based on Christianity or Catholicism, just with the fact that they're using the Christian Bible, and it's pulling a lot from that. But I did like the Archbishop character. I don't know if I'm supposed to or not, but I really enjoyed his character. Anytime he was on the page, I was really invested in what he was going to do. I really like Reed as a character, and again, his dynamic with Lou works because of who he is as a character. And so their interactions often made me laugh out loud. I would read passages out loud to my husband because I was having a good time. This is 500 pages, and I think I read it in 2 days. It has a sequel. I think I'm good. I don't need to know what happens next, because everything that happened in this was enough for me. I had a great time. It is definitely in my, will reread again, because I had a great time, and you don't pass up on things where you have that good of a time. It is not for everyone. It is for me. It is my trash. After that, I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, translated by Jenny Tapley Takamori. This is about Keiko, who works at a convenience store, kind of like a 7-Eleven. I kept picturing Huck's because that was what I grew up with, or a Circle K or a Quick Trip, kind of something like that, except it's not. That's the American understanding of it. A Combini has a lot more to it, but Keiko is 36, and she's still working at this convenience store that she's been working at for the past 18 years of her life, and everyone thinks she's weird for it. It's like, why aren't you trying to get a career? Why aren't you trying to start a family? Why aren't you dating anyone? Why are you content to exist at this convenience store? And the whole book, which is very short, this is just 170 pages, so it's really more of a novella. It's all about her understanding why people have those expectations for her, and kind of picking the worst possible options to kind of prove to people that it doesn't make her happy. She picks just a deadbeat guy who works at the convenience store who gets fired, and she's like, yeah, here's my boyfriend. And the thing is while he worked there, no one liked the guy. They all hated the guy. But as soon as she's like, yeah, I'm living with him now, they're like, oh my gosh, that's great. You should bring him when we go out this weekend. And she's like, are you kidding me? It's such a good book. It's such a satisfying book. Having a fulfilling life is fun to read about. I loved reading about how much she invested in her job, how she would, get off the train a couple of stops early so she could see what other stores or things were happening around so that her store wouldn't be caught off guard. Having a novel that celebrates someone who understands what their life can be and what they want their life to be is really great. One of the blurbs is a celebration of nonconformity that is both joyous and unsettling. And celebration of nonconformity kind of does encapsulate everything. Work a job that means a lot to you, that makes you feel like a cog in the machine. She even talks about how she likes being this cog in the machine. It's so good. It's a really great little novel, and I I do recommend this one because it's only 170 pages. I think just every once in a while having that kind of reading experience is good. After that, I read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which is a YA fantasy about Jude Carden and her sister who, at the age of 7, were kidnapped and taken to the land of the Fae because their stepdad, is a redcap. So this was billed to me as YA fantasy romance, and I know that a lot of people have that expectation going into it, and there's not the romance they're expecting. I was glad there was not the romance I was expecting because the politics and the mystery were actually a lot more interesting to me than the romance could have been. I do like Carden. He's the alleged romantic interest. He's just kind of a jerk, and he is a titular cruel prince. It's not necessarily just him. He does have brothers. But there's like a mystery going on, and there's a challenge to the succession of the Fae throne because they are Fae. They don't necessarily do biological direct descendants as the next crowned leader. And so when the succession crisis happens, it leads to a lot of interesting twists and turns. And so Jude wants to kind of worm her way into favor with some of these Fae because she's human. She has some things that she can do that the Fae can't. Holly Black does abide by some of the Fae rules of like Fae aren't allowed to lie and humans can, and that makes her kind of a valuable asset. And because humans tend to be servants within these households, she's able to kind of invisibly move between these spaces. I had a lot of fun. I ended up buying the sequel more for market research because I have a story that I'm writing that does take place in kind of the Fae realm, and I wanted kind of other perspectives, like when we write Fae, if we're not Sarah J. Maas, what are we doing? What are our Fae experiences like? I had a good time. I like the way that Holly Black writes her characters. It's one that I'm like, if you are in the Fae fantasy genre, it's probably for you, but I honestly don't know. And odds are you've probably read it before me, so there we go. After that, I read Born Standing Up by Steve Martin, which is... he calls it a biography instead of an autobiography because he reflects early on how it almost feels like he's meeting himself for the first time, writing about someone that he doesn't really remember or know anymore. And it's a really cool memoir of sorts because it is all through the lens of comedy. It is all through the lens of hammering a joke until it works, of ditching material, trying something new, figuring out who you are as a comic, and I really enjoyed it. He has such a wit and a way of writing that makes it feel like someone you know is recounting their own personal experiences to you, like over dinner or something, and he's just so fun. I really enjoy Steve Martin in a lot of like the movies and some of his stand-up that he's done. And so having the opportunity to read his book is also just 200 pages really quick. It's good. Even if you're not like a big Steve Martin fan, if you're into comedy in the process of learning how to express oneself creatively even, I think it's worthwhile because... once he reaches the top, he just kind of is like, yeah, that's it. That's how it goes. And the way it all sounds, you know, starting from his very, very early days, working at like theme parks to opening huge, massive shows, I think he does a really good job of making it feel grounded. It never feels mythic. I really like the way he writes everything down and the way that he approaches everything. There's a grace and a humility to it all that is just very pleasant, very warm. So yeah, I do recommend that one. After that, trying to get it to stop reflecting. After that, I read Circe by Madeline Miller. Circe is like the first mythic figure that I remember really latching onto. There was a kids mythology book in my library in elementary school. And I remember it was a big, wide, rectangular book, almost square. And there's a picture of her. She had really long black hair kind of like blowing to the side. And she had a cloak on. And I think she wasn't walking on water, but that was kind of like the image that I kept in my brain. And she, like, that fried itself into my brain forever. And I've been trying to find that specific picture just to like... see if anyone else recognizes it, but I don't know. But this is like one of those mythology retellings of a woman in mythology to kind of make her more the centerpiece of her own story. And I thought after the experiences I had reading Ariadne that I would have a different experience with Cersei, and I did not. I liked Cersei more, but it's still just, it did not grab me. And it's again kind of that thing of like, if it's a feminist retelling, what does that mean? Why does that artificially raise the bar? And why does feminist retelling just involve a character being sad? The one thing I will say that it has going for it is Cersei feels like she has an actual character. There's a lot of just rage and petty anger that she has early on in the story that kind of sets up a lot of the mistakes that she makes down the road. I like when Odysseus enters the scene. I think that's really good. But while a lot of the books that I've read this month, I could tell you approximately what happens. Like it's been almost a whole month since I read Serpented Dog, and I could tell you pretty much everything that happens there. Cersei, I can tell you what happened at like the beginning and the end. The middle gets a little muddy, and it wasn't that long ago that I read it. There are a couple things that Cersei does, I think, better than Ariadne. Cersei and Ariadne share the scene where Pasiphae gives birth to the Minotaur, and the way that those are handled are just very different and interesting, and I like the lens through which Cersei looks at that event. But even so, it's just, it's hard to discern who Cersei is, and we just spend so many chapters on this island straight vibing. Again, I think the source material inhibits it. There's some wild things that happen, and there's a wild thing that happens in the beginning, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it contributes to anything, and it feels like it holds it back. This book resonates with a lot of people, not with me, and that's okay. After that, I read Scattered Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada, translated by Margaret Mitsutani. This is about a future in which Japan has been completely submerged in water, and a woman, Hiruko, has traveled to Scandinavia to try and find anyone who can help her find someone who speaks Japanese. And the book is told primarily through the perspectives of like 5 or 6 different characters who all interact with Hiruko and try to help her find someone else who can speak Japanese. I was really attracted to the cover and the description of the book being cheerfully dystopian. And it's in the same way that We by Yevgeny Zemyatin is like a dystopia for math people, this is kind of a dystopia for language people, because it is a really interesting look at like communicating how we get information across. And I really like the chapters from Knut's perspective, who's this Scandinavian guy that Hiruko comes into contact with, and he offers to kind of help her. On the whole, like it's a very quick book. The wheels kind of give out towards the end, but I thought the book was very charming. I will say, if you're curious about reading it, there's a character named Akash who is from India, and she's transgender. She wears a sari the whole book. She mentions early on that she lives as a woman. The whole book, though, that's like the only chapter that's from Akash's perspective. The rest of the book, all of the other people's perspectives, use masculine pronouns for Akash, and they keep just referring to her as a man living as a woman. There's no scene where Akash corrects anyone, and they kept doing it through the whole book, and I don't know if that's just a quirk of translation or if that's actually how Yoko Tawada wrote it, but by the time I got to the end of the book, I felt like I had been gaslit, and so I went back to the beginning of the book to be like, wait, no, Akash said she lives as a woman. A weird blip, but I do want to make people aware of it if they're curious. I don't think it necessarily soured my experience of the book. It was just kind of like a weird 95% of it I enjoyed at the very least. After that, I read Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susann. So the reason I bought this was because Barnes & Noble was doing like a 50th anniversary edition, and I really liked the pink pages and the black glossy cover. This is all about 3 girls who are in entertainment. They're trying to like climb their way to the top, girl boss, shatter the glass ceiling, whatever. And just kind of like the classic fame isn't everything, you know, it's not worth it at the top kind of novel. And it's fine. It suffers from being like a sensational novel at the time of its publication and release. Like for 1966, I'm sure this was just like shocking and horrifying. Oh my gosh, they're doing drugs and having casual sex. Oh no. Today, it comes across as very melodramatic, especially now that a lot of people who do work in Hollywood have come forward with the, actual realities of their experiences. This book feels very tame by comparison. But there's certain elements that I still liked. The big takeaway was, it's like, look, if your boss sits you down and he's like, hey, don't date Leon Burke, he's a terrible person. Maybe don't date Leon Burke because he's gonna ruin your life. Like, it says a lot. It says so much when the best guy in the book is the 55-year-old boss who runs the office and hires all of these pretty girls to work at. It says so much that he is the only decent human being looking out for these people. There are scenes that I really enjoy, and I had... It feels very camp, and so I had a fun time with kind of the camp aspects of it. But some of it is just like, oh my gosh, you're making such horrible decisions. Because you have Anne, who is, she works at the office. She came to New York to get away from her sleepy town. She didn't want to marry the guy that everyone assumed she was going to marry. She just wanted to live her life, make her own decisions. And so she comes to work there. And immediately after she moves there, there's a rich guy, a millionaire who may even be a billionaire by 1945 standards. He's like, I want to marry you. And she's like, we're not getting married. And he's like, we are. I'm going to introduce you to my dad. And she's like, we're not getting married. And she breaks up with him, and everyone's like, you realize that no other millionaire is going to ask you to marry them. Like, you can't just ditch this life. And so her arc is all about like self-sufficiency and independence. And I am a sucker for conversations about like the feminine and about the role women played in the past, and kind of the tension between choice and security. And so I liked that. And then there's Neely, who grew up in vaudeville, but she becomes like an actual genuine stage and movie star. And she's the one whose story really revolves around like the drug and alcohol abuse and all of the perils therein. And then there is Jennifer, who... I forget who she's based on, maybe Marilyn Monroe, but she also reminds me a lot of like Hedy Lamarr, who did a lot of international films where she could actually be naked, and that was like really scandalous at the time. But Jennifer, her big tragedy is that she's so pretty, she's so gorgeous, she's so perfect, and no one respects her as a person. Which, like, yeah, I guess that is a problem. And they kind of move in and out of each other's spaces. They move in and out of each other's lives. And it's just kind of like, and things are bad because fame isn't everything, and Hollywood and New York City are nightmares, but we wouldn't trade it for the world. I don't understand why you would date Leon Burke when he's presented with 3 opportunities to work at an office, earn a steady income, date and marry someone that he loves, or leave all of that to write his book that he doesn't even have a plan for. I was rooting for you, Anne. I thought you were the smart one. I thought you were the smart girl. You decided to pine after a guy who left his job, left you to work on a book that he didn't even have a plan. He just leaves for England because he's like, you know what, steady income? Nah, I'm just gonna work on my book. Like, I work on my book, but I wouldn't leave my job or my husband to work on my book. He didn't have a plan. The bar is on the ground. Oh my gosh. Jacqueline Susann is a very confident person. She believes in her work, so much so that the back cover has a quote on it that says the 1960s will be remembered for Andy Warhol, the Beatles, and me. And that's the kind of confidence we should go into everything with. So more respect to Jacqueline Susann. I did enjoy this more than Played as It Lays by Joan Didion, but that's not saying much. After that, I read The High Mountain Court by A.K. Mulford, which is an indie book. I will always be really excited when I find independently published works out in the wild because I think it's important to support indie authors. This is all about Remy, who is a witch, and she is kidnapped by Fae. It's really a culmination of everything I've read so far this month, because the Fae need her to help reclaim the throne of the Great Mountain Court that she's going to go and hang out with. I was under the impression it was just like regular fantasy, and then the dicks came out. It was like a smut fantasy, so I know that now, and I know that is not for me. It's well written enough, but man, I am not cut out to reading Fated Mate 8 different times on a page. It's not my jam. I do think it's really sweet. In the dedication, she dedicates it to her mom, And she's like, thank you for always telling me the little girl with the notebooks full of stories, and one day you'll be holding her published book. Please don't read chapter 23 and 24. So it meant we were braced for impact and impact and impact and impact. I was sobbing, trying to hold back my laughter at passages like the sound of their hot, wet flesh slapping against each other was the only sound in the forest. Hail ramped up to a punishing speed, barreling toward its climax, and Remy couldn't hold on anymore. She shattered. 2 more pumps and Hail exploded into her, barking out her name. Why is shattering the only verb I've ever seen for female climaxes in literature? Why is that the case? And why are we barking out each other's name? And why is it punishing speed? Is this... I picture like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, and it's like, punishing speed, Mr. Sulu. We're coming for that ass. Other things happened in this book. I know other things happened in this book. It's one of those like walking fantasy books where we gotta walk everywhere to get to locations, and so the majority of the book is spent going on a little journey. The big takeaway is this is not my genre. I cannot take it seriously, and I am glad that I could support an independently published book. And lastly, I read PTL by John Wigger. This is all about Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, who were televangelists in the 70s and 80s before Scandal kind of tore their little empire apart. I love this kind of content so much. Inject this right into my veins. It's so good because I grew up Baptist. I didn't grow up fundamentalist or charismatic like they did. And so we never watched the PTL Club. We never really watched televangelists. We just kind of like laughed behind our hands at them. I do have a deep fascination with the intersection between like religion, fame, and culture, and how there's a mutual influence across the board. It's so infuriating to see like the Bible being manipulated into no oversight because we wanted to trust the people that we're working with, or, you know, they're doing God's work, who cares? And so seeing things like, it's God's will for you to be rich, you just have to ask for it. Like, that's so not how things work. I can't even begin to tell you. I love the idea of exploring religious grift, so much so that I have a Dungeons and Dragons character who invented a whole religion to avoid paying taxes, and I hold him very near and dear to my heart. The religious conflict is really compelling to me. And so seeing it all play out and kind of walking through just how it started from extremely humble origins, but they wanted so much more, and how they were so emblematic of the United States in the 80s. The excess and the influence and power and, you know, being a mover and shaker in society was the most important thing. You know, Jesus wants you to be rich. You should ask to be rich. And they were just perfect for kind of the Ronald Reagan era of America, that they were very complimentary for his rise to power as well. And so if you are into like religious nonfiction or nonfiction about religion, this is definitely a really cool read. I had a lot of fun with it. Part of my interest in them was the Eyes of Tammy Faye movie with Jessica Chastain and Andrew Garfield, which was really enjoyable. I enjoyed it, and I appreciated being able to follow it up with this book and learn a little bit more, because I do enjoy some good nonfiction, which reminds me, next month is Thick Nonfic. Every August or some month during the summer, I like to read a nonfiction book that is very big, that I know I can focus on and make individual videos about, so I hope to get started on that soon. I'm still choosing between a couple of them, so I won't be able to say what I'm reading. You'll just have to find out. Yeah, let me know. Have you read any of these books? I didn't intend to read so many. If you're looking to get caught up, the big strat is just read books that are 200 pages. But have you read any of these? Do any of these sound good to you? What are you reading? What are you watching? Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, I hope you're having a lovely, lovely evening, and I will see you all next time.